If we're going to make a document that really pops or stands out from the crowd, in a good way that is, or if we're going to work with advanced types of content, we do need to know how to do a little bit more as far as our character formatting goes than what's simply available from the ribbon. In some ways, this begins to kind of blur those lines between word processing and graphic design, but that's actually a good thing when it's used appropriately. One of the tools that we can use that's very simple and very elegant is known as a drop cap. Actually, the name is a little misnomer because it can either be dropped or lowered, or it can also be raised, but it's called a drop cap nonetheless. And I think these are a really good way to have very large blocks of text with just a little bit of extra emphasis in them without having too much pizzazz or going overboard. In this case, what I've done is move to the top of my second page where we can see our table of contents as well as the executive summary. And then, of course, we have a couple paragraphs of text that starts with "You Got It Training Company is a technology training company," and so forth. What we'd like to do is break this up a little bit since it is the initial text in the document by adding a drop cap. So what we're going to do is select the Y in "You Got It Training Company" and turn that into the drop cap itself. You can go ahead and click and drag, or you can hold your Shift key and use your right or left arrow keys to move over it. Just do whatever you have to do to select the character. In this case, it's one letter, but know that actually it could be multiple characters. That's kind of up to your own design style. Next thing we'll do is we'll go to the Insert tab. All the way over on the right-hand side, in the text group, we have a drop cap option, and we can choose none, which is the default. We can choose it to be dropped, or we can put it in the margin. Instead of using one of these predefined styles, we're going to go down to drop cap options so you can see exactly what options you have. Again, we have the three options that we saw before, and we're going to choose dropped, but then we can choose what font we want it to be. It could be something different than our regular font. We also can choose how many lines to drop and the distance from the text that it should be. We're going to make this kind of a little bit of a casual influence. We want this to be a professional document, but also not too stuffy. So instead of the body font, which is what it currently has, we're going to go ahead and scroll down until we find Comic Sans. If you don't happen to have Comic Sans on your computer, you can choose another font. The font itself is not really critical. Then we can choose how many lines to drop it. We'll go ahead and leave that at 3. And we're also not going to add any extra space. So we'll go ahead and say OK. And you can see that we now have this beautiful dropped Y in a different font that does exactly what we asked it to do and adds just a little bit of pop to this body text. It's simple, but it's also elegant. And we won't want to use it on every paragraph, but the very beginning or maybe the start of a new chapter or section is a really good place to do this, and I'm sure you've seen it in some printed publications that you've worked with before. Now let's take a look at a more advanced concept called ligatures. Ligatures are new in Office 2010, and they're a little bit more complicated than just drop caps or working with some of our character or font formatting. And in fact, they really stretch the gap between word processing and graphic design. But we're obligated to share them with you, and they are kind of cool. Just know that we're going to go over kind of the basics of them, and you'll really need to go in and play with them to figure out exactly what you can do with them in your own documents. Let's talk a little bit about the concept, though, of ligatures, OpenType, and typography. Typography 101 starts with knowing that typography is really the art and technique of composition using type. In other words, instead of just putting stuff on the page, how can we actually use type to create a mood or communicate a message, those types of things. We can work with typography in both electronic or hard copy documents. Typography is also different from composition that uses graphic elements. Remember, this is just type. It has nothing to do with pictures and clip art and lines and those types of things. There are several different components that make up typography. Some of the basic ones that we're going to be concerned with are, of course, choosing the right fonts, working with the characters themselves, working with attributes of those characters like bold and italics, as well as things like spacing. All of things go together to create a mood or create an effect or communicate a message. Ligatures are actually part of something called OpenType fonts. Basically, OpenType fonts are scalable computer font formats that have been created in, I should say, just the recent years in the grand scheme of things. They're based on TrueType and PostScript fonts, which you may have heard about when you're working either with type or possibly buying a printer. The important thing about them is that they are cross-platform compatible, meaning they'll work on both the PC and the Mac. Most importantly for us is that OpenType fonts give us extended character sets and advanced typographic controls that we can use in our documents to create the mood, the effect, and so forth that we want. These include features like small caps, ligatures, which we've been mentioning and we'll get into a little bit more, as well as things like number forms and spacing. They also include something called stylistic sets, and we'll get into what each of these means in just a little bit more detail as we move forward. Let's start with ligatures themselves. A ligature, in its real definition, is called a material that's used to bind or tie something together. In typography, these are things that we use to tie two or more letters into one single character, also known as a glyph. Usually this means to represent a specific sound or specific types of words. One type of that, or one specific type that we can talk about, is a diphthong or a diphthong, depending on how you pronounce it. And I'm sure you've seen these in some places as well. Whether you've used them or not, I'm not sure. But basically, it's a letter combination, usually vowels, that are connected when they're spoken. So they kind of make a smooth or gliding sound instead of distinct sounds for each letter. Here's a couple of examples combining the A and E sound. So again, this may be something that's highly specialized, but it's part of what we're going to be talking about with the new features available in Word 2010. In Word 2010, we first see the availability of ligatures and the ability to utilize them. They're going to display properly as a glyph, but the nice thing about it is Word will still recognize the individual letters. Why do we care about that? Well, it means that we can still search for things based on their spelling, and the spell check also still works. And those are two important things that weren't available before. Sometimes we could have inserted these things as symbols, but again, that kind of takes away this ability to make them searchable and work with the spell check. In Word, there are 4 basic categories of ligatures that we can talk about. Now, we're not going to go again into a lot of detail, but they include standard only, standard and contextual, historical and discretionary, and then, of course, the all category. The standard only varies by language, but it contains the most common and appropriate ligatures that are kind of recognized with that language. Standard and contextual, of course, include all the ones that we have in the standard category, but contextual are the ones that the font designer thinks are appropriate for common usage, but they're not considered quite standard. Historical and discretionary has historical forms that were once standard but are no longer commonly used and can be used for kind of a period effect or a historical effect. Discretionary are those that the font designer included for specific purposes. We'd probably apply these only to parts of a document, not to the entire document. And then, of course, all are all combinations available for the font and that can be applied to the text. So I think that's enough background for now. Let's talk a little bit about some extra things that we have available as far as ligatures and the other stylistic effects that come with Word 2010. The first would be something called number spacing. As you might expect, number spacing has to do with the spacing of numbers. There are 3 different types of number spacing features that we get with OpenType fonts. The first, of course, is the default, which is what we see unless we make a change. The next one that we might choose to use is something called proportional number spacing. This means that the numbers are spaced like letters with varying widths. Spacing is going to be easier to read if it's within other text when we use this type of number spacing. The last type is called tabular, and this is going to be something that will be easier to read if we're using numbers in things like tables. Each number then would have exactly the same width. The numbers are going to align better using this particular spacing. As I said, this is going to be useful when we're trying to align things in tables. The next thing we need to know about numbers is we do have different number forms. Of course, we have the default, which again is what we will see by default in any document. But we also can set it to use a lining number form. This means that all of the numbers are going to have the same height, and they do not extend below the baseline. The baseline is kind of that line that letters and numbers normally sit on. This makes them easier to read in tables, boxes, and on things like forms. We also have something called the old style. This is where they're allowed to flow above or below the line of text. And I gave a couple of examples here so you can see it. First, we have a standard font, a default font, known as Helvetica. Then I'm showing you some numbers that use the Cambria font, and lastly one called Candera. You'll see how in the middle with Cambria, the 3 and the 5 are the same height and they kind of sit along the same baseline as the text that we have typed there as well. But when we go to our last example of Candera, there we can see that the 3 and the 5 kind of have that little swoosh that goes below the baseline. That's what we're talking about when we say it's allowed to flow above or below the line of text. The last thing that we can use that has to do with OpenType is something called Stylistic Sets, and we're actually going to use this one in our document. Technically, we have stylistic sets that include the same font, but they have variations in the characters or the way that the text is actually drawn. A font may include up to 20 stylistic sets, and sets may contain contextual alternates as well. Contextual alternates are kind of tweaks based on the surrounding letters. Some fonts include them for letter pairs, others for entire words. So not everything's going to have some of these contextual alternates, but you can choose whether to use them or not. An example might be where if you're writing in a script font, it's going to make it look more flowing and natural. The default set is designated by the font designer. So again, you may never know that a stylistic set exists, but you might be using the default because that's what comes up, as we'd expect, by default. Sets are selected by numbers, and we'll see that as we get to it in our document in just a moment. So if it has 1 or 7 sets, you're simply going to say apply stylistic set 1, apply stylistic set 3, and so forth. It's actually difficult to let you know about all of these features in a short time period. Since this is really an advanced typography tool, I tried to kind of find a balance that allows you to see what there are and what they can do and why they're important with enough background so you can understand them, but without making an entire series out of it. So with that background there, let's go ahead and do a little bit of formatting using 1 or 2 of these features in our document to get it finished up. In our document, we're going to continue to work with the title that's on our very first page. So let's go ahead and scroll back up where we can see Strategy for Organizational Success and select it. Now we're going to go back to the Home tab, and we're going to display the dialog box by using the dialog box launcher. But this time, instead of looking at the Font tab that we looked at earlier, we want to click on the Advanced tab. First of all, we can work with the scaling. What we can see right now is that it's scaled to 100%, which we would expect. We can actually scale this larger or smaller, which might be necessary for some effects. What I prefer to look at right now is spacing. We want to make our title stand out just a little bit more as a title other than just using small caps and making it bold. So we're going to apply expanded spacing, which simply means the space between the letters is going to be a little bit larger. We could actually designate how large we want that to be. We also can designate a position, in this case the same as superscripting and subscripting, and we can set that here as well. And we can also do things called kerning, which is the spacing between letter pairs. Now as I said, this is really advanced stuff, so we're not going to get into it too much. Primarily we would normally do superscript or subscript right from the ribbon, but I did want to show you the expanded spacing as well. Now we can get down to the part that has to do with open type. Currently we can see Ligatures is set to none. This is where we get to see those different categories that we were talking about earlier. We could select any one of those if that's what we wanted to do. Likewise, if we were working with numbers, we could work with our number spacing and our number forms. What we're going to do is actually just work with the style sets. We'll go ahead and give that a down click, and we'll go from the default to style 1, and I want you to watch the little preview that's at the bottom of our window. When we do style set 1, we can see, okay, there was a little bit of a change, but maybe not too much. Let's go all the way down to number 5. Again, there's something there, but not much. Well, what I know is we need to make a change before we're able to use this. Let me go ahead and say OK to apply our spacing and watch the text on the document. See how now it's definitely wider spaced? That's perfect. The problem is that we're currently using the Calibri font. And if we look at the Calibri font, we can see that it really isn't one that we want to use. Instead, let's go ahead and choose one that we know is going to have some nice stylistic effects, and I know that one of those is Gabriola. I'm just going to start typing that so we don't have to scroll in the list so much. It's a little bit difficult to see because in this list it actually is fairly small, but we can see it all the way at the bottom. We'll give that a click. And now look what it does to our font. Now let's go ahead and go back into the dialog, back to our Advanced tab, and let's choose a different stylistic set. If we do stylistic set 1, we can see that that has a little bit of flair on the end, but not too much, as opposed to stylistic set 5, which is pretty dramatic. This is what I wanted to show you about the ability to use stylistic effects. So we'll click OK. We'll actually apply that, and you can see that this is an effect that we got without having to go out and choose a completely different font. It is the Gabriola font, but there were different variations within the font that add a little bit of pizzazz to our document. This may be a little bit more than we want for a business plan, but it certainly has its own purposes. We might want to go back in and choose something a little less dramatic for the business plan, but hopefully you get the idea. Remember that all of these wonderful ligatures and features and things that we're showing can only be used if they're included in the font itself. They're the high end of what we can do with character or font formatting. We format our documents to add visual organization and appeal. If we go a little bit deeper from the author's standpoint, formatting can also be used as a design tool to convey a feeling or style, professional, casual, fancy. They also help identify a company through the use of its font and color branding. So if I had a floral company, for example, I might choose to use the Gabriola font with Stylistic Set 5 because it has the look and feel that I want associated with my company, with my name, and with my brand. These are the features that turn solid but ordinary documents into remarkable ones. It's kind of like having the choice between a room with good construction, solid clean white walls and floors, versus one that has crown molding around the top and an accent wall. Both are good. Both serve a purpose. Depending on what your purpose is, you simply need to know how you can achieve either one of those looks. And now we know how to do that using one of the advanced features known as OpenType